Well, a warm welcome to you all, and thank you for participating in this education session that's titled 10 Easy Ways to Fight Stigma Against Dementia. My name is Chris Van Lubin, and with me today is Shelby Berry. Together, we make up half of the education team at the Alzheimer Society of Peterborough, Kawartha Lakes, Northumberland, and Haliburton. And we're pleased to share with you some important information about the stigma associated with dementia and the negative impact that it can have on those living with and caring for someone who's living with dementia. So in today's session, it's going to be a little bit more of a lecture style presentation. And afterwards, after we're done with the slideshow portion, there's going to be a period for questions and discussion. We recognize that you might have several thoughts or questions that come up for you throughout the session, so we encourage you to write them down or put them in the chat, and we can always address them at the end of the presentation. Before we get started here, I just need to stop sharing for 1 second, because I realized I forgot to share the sound, and we do have a video. Let's try this one more time. There we go. So you might be wondering why we're here today. Well, as many of you know, in Canada, January is Alzheimer's Awareness Month. And during this month, we at the Society encourage organizations across Canada and individuals just like you to learn more about dementia and its stark impact on Canadians. And while Alzheimer's Awareness Month might stop at the end of January, the experiences of people who live with dementia do not stop. And as such, we'd like to take what you've learned during the month and continue to share it throughout the year. By understanding what people living with dementia experience in their day-to-day lives, their struggles, their successes, their hopes, together we can raise awareness of dementia throughout Canada. Awareness is the first step to fighting stigma, reinforcing human rights, and pushing for policy change, as well as other actions that can lift up Canadians living with dementia. Though dementia affects more than 500,000 Canadians, and 1 in 5 Canadians have experienced caring for someone living with dementia, there's really still a lack of awareness of the many issues that face people living with dementia, their caregivers, and their families in Canada. So these issues include things like stigmatizing attitudes against dementia that really misrepresent the realities of the disease, and they actually work to diminish the experience of people living with dementia, their families, and their caregivers. We also have a crisis in our healthcare system where many long-term care homes and hospitals, they're just not equipped to meet the needs of Canadians who live with dementia. And the fact that many of our systemic policies that directly affect people living with dementia are created and followed without enlisting their unique input or their insight. It's part of the Alzheimer's Society's mission to alleviate the personal and the social consequences of dementia. And this mission is reflected in the campaigns that we have that help to share the voices of people who live with the disease, and also in our work to advocate for changes at the government level and more. So in this presentation, we're going to explore stigma, what it looks like, and the steps that we can all take to eliminate it. I'm going to hand things over to Shelby now to share a little bit more.
Great, thank you, Chris. So we're going to start our presentation today by going back to the basics and looking at the definition of stigma. So the Oxford English Dictionary defines stigma as a mark of disgrace associated with a particular circumstance, quality, or person. So stigma against dementia encompasses any negative attitude or discriminatory behavior against people living with dementia simply on the basis of having the disease. When a disease is as prevalent as dementia, yet is still poorly understood, It's easy for false beliefs to spread. And left unchallenged, these beliefs perpetuate stigmatizing attitudes against people living with dementia, which can really affect and reduce their quality of life. These attitudes also extend to the families and caregivers of people living with dementia, affecting them as well. The unfortunate reality is that any person living with dementia is likely to encounter stigma at some point, following their diagnosis, even though dementia can affect anyone. So no one is immune, to the risks of dementia, and there is no cure or treatment that can guarantee prevention at this point. So it's important to recognize that people living with dementia did not choose to have this disease. And, getting a diagnosis can be really difficult and really emotional. So we want to make sure that we aren't adding labels or having the person feel ignored, among other negative responses due to their diagnosis. Stigma not only hurts people living with dementia, it can also discourage their families from confiding in others or getting the support that they need. So today we're going to learn how to recognize stigma against dementia. So really looking at this question of what does stigma against dementia look like? So a lot of stigma stems from lack of awareness about dementia. So stereotypes and misinformation can affect friends or family members' willingness or comfort in providing help. Due to unfounded myths about dementia, people may believe that nothing can be done or dismiss symptoms as just a normal part of aging. And this really isn't helpful to hear for a person living with dementia. Unfortunately, most people do not seek to educate themselves about dementia, even if they knew someone living with the disease. So according to the Alzheimer's Society's 2017 awareness survey, only 5% of Canadians said they would try to learn more about dementia if someone close to them were diagnosed. So that's a pretty surprising statistic. Ultimately, many people believe that it's just not possible to live well with dementia. According to that same survey, 1 in 2 Canadians don't believe they could live well with dementia, and 1 in 4 Canadians believe that their life would be over after getting a diagnosis. Harmful and misleading assumptions also fuel stigma surrounding dementia. So people living with dementia get unfairly treated based on assumptions about their abilities. And this can be especially uncomfortable for people in the early stages. If someone's assuming that their abilities are more progressed than they actually are. And people in the early stages of dementia, they understand that maybe they're being treated differently. And this unfair treatment can happen anywhere. It could be in the doctor's office, it could be in the grocery store, even at home. It's also a common perception that Alzheimer's disease and dementia are the same, when in reality, Alzheimer's is just one of the many types of dementia. So for people who live with a dementia that's not Alzheimer's disease, it can be frustrating if other people just assume that they have Alzheimer's disease and ignore the other symptoms that different types of dementia may bring or that person may be experiencing. It's commonly assumed that memory loss is the only aspect of dementia. Sorry, someone just came in the waiting room and then popped out. So it's commonly assumed that memory loss is the only aspect of dementia as well, ignoring the other symptoms that people living with dementia experience. And these assumptions can lead people to self-diagnose or to diagnose dementia in other people. And it's important to remember that only a qualified healthcare professional, such as a family doctor, a gain or memory clinic, or a geriatrician can provide that official diagnosis of dementia. Stigma can also be present in the language that we use. And negative language is often used to describe dementia, tending to focus on losses brought about by the disease. Consider the phrase that we often hear, people suffering with dementia, for example. That can be commonly used, and we often see that a lot in the media still, unfortunately. So while these losses are real, negative language focuses on weaknesses rather than strengths, and illness rather than wellness. It reduces people living with dementia to victims rather than whole persons. Wording can also reduce the experience of people living with dementia to a series of labels, symptoms, or medical terms. No one wants to be considered a patient or a case of dementia. They want to be treated as a person first and foremost. So the awareness survey that we've been referencing revealed that 51% of Canadians have used stigmatizing language when talking about dementia. Examples of stigmatizing language include telling a dementia-related joke, referring to someone as senile, crazy, or demented. And we're going to take a closer look at person-centered language when we discuss ways to fight dementia later in the presentation. And kind of along the same line or in line with negative language, belittlement and jokes can also be a form of stigma against dementia. So showing sympathy to someone living with dementia can certainly help when they receive that diagnosis, but we want to be careful of saying things like, oh, I have problems with my memory too. I forget where I put my glasses or my cell phone all the time. So, your challenges with memory are very likely not at the same level as the person living with dementia. Forgetting some of those things like glasses the odd time may very well be a part of normal aging, but the changes that come with dementia are not a part of normal aging. The person living with dementia, likely also doesn't want to hear that comparison either. It can feel patronizing and it can minimize their experience as well. And a caregiver named Harold, when reflecting on people's reaction to his wife's diagnosis, had this today to say. So he said, some unfortunately made light of it, even telling a memory type joke, which spoke to their lack of understanding of the disease. Or maybe they just didn't know how to react. One remark that was consistently upsetting was, Barb doesn't seem that bad. You'd never know she had anything wrong. While well-meaning, it made you question yourself that maybe it's not all that bad, but it is. So that was a personal experience from a website that Chris will talk about called ilivewithdementia.ca. So you might be surprised to learn that 30% of Canadians admit to telling a dementia-related joke. While jokes intend to spread joy, they can also reinforce those unfounded public perceptions and stereotypes and assumptions that we talked about earlier. In particular, jokes can contribute to all of those negative assumptions about the abilities of a person living with dementia. And when this happens, those jokes don't spread joy. They can be embarrassing for the person living with dementia and trivialize their experience as well. So some other forms that stigma might take with dementia. So another hallmark of stigma is the lack of support available after a dementia diagnosis. So negative reactions from friends, family, or coworkers can impact a person's well-being and ability to manage the changes that are brought about by dementia. So for example, assuming that nothing can be done to help, the people in the affected person's, circle of support, their friends may start to withdraw, no longer interacting with the person living with dementia, and then perhaps the caregiver as well. However, this is a time when a person living with dementia really needs that circle of support more than ever. Research shows that maintaining that social interaction can help the person living with dementia really delay that progression into the later stages. Due to fear of negative reactions, people experiencing symptoms may also avoid seeking or getting a diagnosis, or they may try to hide their diagnosis from friends or family members. So again, not getting that support that they need. According to the 2017 awareness survey, 1 in 5 Canadians would avoid seeking help for as long as possible if they thought that they had dementia. And this is especially harmful because the earlier a person gets diagnosed, the sooner they can get the help and support that they need to improve quality of life. Lack of support is especially challenging for people who are diagnosed with young onset dementia, so diagnosed before the age of 65. Since most people assume that dementia affects people aged over 65, dementia education and resources are often tailored to that age group. As a result, it's difficult for people living with young onset dementia to find the appropriate supports that they need. So we're really happy here to have a young onset day program with our Alzheimer's Society, for example, that really help to fill a void in our community where people with young onset dementia can now be involved in programs in the community as well. So that's great. Stigma can also take the form of stigma by association. So it's important to know that caregivers feel the impact of stigma too. Among the 1 in 5 caregivers who have experienced caring for someone living with dementia, half have personally reported that they personally experienced stigma. So examples of stigma against caregivers may include difficulty accessing appropriate supports or services, being excluded from participating in treatment or care decisions, feeling ignored or dismissed, or experiencing social isolation or avoidance. Caring for a person living with dementia can be extremely demanding, often increasing feelings of guilt and stress for the caregiver. The survey results indicate that 41% of caregivers believe that their life would be better if they weren't caring for someone living with dementia. So this sentiment is understandable, given that caregivers often find they lack the support that they need, sometimes even within their own family. So some other interesting statistics that came from the survey said that 66% of caregivers find the experience of caregiving isolating. 87% of caregivers wish that people understood more about the realities of caring for someone living with dementia. And only 39% of Canadians would offer support for family or friends who were open about having dementia. So some pretty interesting statistics there. And lastly, stigma can also have an impact on one's self-worth, and they may feel a loss of self-worth. So with all the factors, that we've talked about so far, it's easy to see how a person living with dementia may experience self-stigma, or what we call self-imposed stigma. They may start to doubt their abilities or their worth to others. The survey results revealed that the greatest concern about having dementia that Canadians have is being a burden to others. And this ranked higher than other serious concerns, such as losing their independence or the ability to recognize family and friends. So for both people living with dementia and the general public, the impression here can be that people living with dementia, contribute little to society. And this simply isn't true, as evidenced by the many people living with dementia who are active in their communities and who participate and, take the lead in national conversations around dementia. However, stigma does make these opportunities harder for people living with dementia to share their voices. So now we're going to, hopefully that gave you an idea of what stigma may look like, the different forms it may take. And now Chris is going to share a video here.
Thanks, Shelby. Yeah, here we'd like to share a video in which people living with dementia share their stories of positivity, hope, and of stigma. And it was created in the UK as part of the Living Well with Dementia initiative and funded by the National Institute for Health Research. So we'll dive into it.
When you're living with dementia, it can be a bumpy journey. You can't tell that someone is living with dementia as there aren't any visible signs, and sometimes you can experience stigma. I've had people in shops tutting at me when I struggled with my money, apologising to other customers for how long I was taking. I don't think they had any idea how that would make me feel. They forgot me, the person. People can be impatient and lack understanding, and for me that's so frustrating, like I'm stuck at a stop sign.
However, on this journey there have been positive experiences. We have all come across the Good Samaritans, the people who help us navigate through this journey of dementia. People who turn the lights from red to green. I've had random strangers help me when my husband went missing. And nursing in the hospital went out of their way to support us during a hospital stay. We were treated with kindness and compassion, something I'll never forget. After a diagnosis of dementia, you don't just pack up and move into a care home. You don't just disappear into the background. There is a life to be lived. You don't need to be isolated if people give you a bit of time and space.
We want people to stop and have a cup, not of tea or coffee, but of compassion, understanding and patience. Compassion motivates people to help others, and with that brings hope and inspiration. Understanding that dementia affects everyone differently and will take a different route for each person. Have some patience, we're all human beings. No one really knows what it's like to travel this journey.
Positive change really starts with learning. And just by joining us today and allocating that time to participate in our education session, you've already taken a step towards being an ally to those who are living with dementia. And when you know the facts behind dementia, you'll be able to challenge assumptions and false beliefs when they appear. By sharing your knowledge, you can reduce the negative impact of stigma against people living with dementia, their families, and caregivers. Over the next slides, we're going to learn about some direct action that you can take to fight stigma against dementia in those 10 easy steps. Step one is to learn the facts about dementia. So talking about dementia lessens our fear and increases our understanding. The Alzheimer Society has many resources, both online and in print, that you can use to learn more about dementia. Once you've increased your understanding of dementia, you can share your knowledge with others. And if you hear something or somebody says something about dementia that's false or that's misleading, don't be afraid to speak up. Don't be afraid to challenge that misconception. Step two is don't make assumptions. So as you likely know, dementia is a progressive disease and it really affects each person differently. A diagnosis doesn't mean that the person's going to have to stop their daily routine or give up working at their job right away. If someone says that they've been diagnosed with dementia, take them at their word. So even if the person doesn't seem old enough, they may have young onset dementia. And if you have any questions come up about dementia, feel free to talk to us. You can reach out to us at the Alzheimer Society. We're happy to provide answers or direct you to more resources in your community. And you can also send any questions that you might have directly to the Alzheimer Society of Canada at info@alzheimer.ca.
Great, thank you, Chris. So as I mentioned earlier, we're going to take a closer look at some person-centered language that is used around dementia. So that's step 3 for the ways to help fight stigma. So language is a unique human gift and a really powerful means of communication. You know, words influence our feelings, our actions, our mood, our self-esteem. Words can really help us to communicate to others our needs and our desires. And we really react physically and emotionally to what is said to us and what is said about us. So how language is used can really affect us strongly, you know, just as strongly as physical actions. And this really is the power of words. So historically, language used to describe Alzheimer's disease and other dementias has largely focused on losses experienced by the person living with dementia. And while these losses are real, negative wording can promote stigma against dementia through perceptions, interpretations, and approaches to care that focus on weakness rather than strength, illness rather than wellness, and victims rather than the whole person. And furthermore, you know, we don't tolerate, you know, racial jokes or jokes about other diseases such as cancer, yet dementia jokes are sadly, you know, still very common. So we want to be mindful that we don't put down people living with dementia by making jokes at their expense. For a person to live well with dementia, it's important to reinforce their dignity, independence, and personhood. Person-centered language really tries to focus more on the person and less on the condition. By consciously using language in a more sensitive manner, we can avoid reducing individuals with dementia to a series of labels, symptoms, or medical terms. So let's take a closer look at some of the specific person-centered language that is preferred when speaking about dementia. So this chart gives some examples of person-centered language for talking about the person living with dementia. So preferred terms include person with dementia, person living with dementia, or a person with a diagnosis of dementia, rather than words like senile, demented, demented person, or a person suffering from dementia, for example. These terms not only hold a negative connotation, but they also suggest that the person is completely incapable as well. Dementia can be referred to as a condition rather than an illness or disease. We don't refer to a person living with dementia as a sufferer, victim, or a burden, as these terms, you know, add to that stigma and add to that stereotype surrounding dementia. They send the message that a life with dementia is not worth living and that people with dementia have little to contribute. And again, that's simply not true. For describing dementia affecting a person who is under the age of 65, we refer to the condition as young onset dementia rather than early onset dementia. So it used to be referred to as early onset dementia, but what became confusing is for the staging of dementia, we often use early, middle, and late stage of dementia. So there was a lot of confusion happening around if someone said they had early onset dementia, someone might assume that they have early stage dementia or vice versa. So the preferred term now is young onset dementia to help reduce that confusion. So overall, using the preferred terms maintains the person's dignity and focuses on the person and less on their condition. And here we have another chart that gives examples of person-centered language to use for caregivers. And caregivers are also commonly referred to as care partners as well. You might hear those words interchanged sometimes. So preferred terms include the effects of caregiving, effects of providing care, referring to caregiver stress or caregiver challenges, or a meaningful caregiver experience. And non-preferred terms really incorporate that notion of a burden. So burden of caregiving or caregiver burden. And the reason for this is that these terms imply that caregiving is always a burden, and really the individual interpretation of caregiving should be up to each individual caregiver. And then on the last chart that we have here, this chart gives examples of person-centered language to use when describing behaviors related to dementia. So what's really important here is to describe a behavior by being as specific as possible, and kind of giving examples by doing that. So for example, the term responsive behavior can be used and is often used for talking about behaviors more generally or general situations. But again, specific descriptions are preferred and are even better. So for example, one could say, the person may strike or hit when asked to undress, instead of saying, just he or she is aggressive. That's just a blanket label. But if we can describe what the behavior is and the context in which it happens, that is more useful. Another example could be explaining that the person seems to become restless at approximately 5 to 6 p.m. most days. And this is better than and more descriptive than the alternative of just using the term sundowning. So again, it gives more context to what's going on, because when we say responsive behavior, we're basically saying that behavior is happening in response to something. So being specific really helps to detail what that might be. Instead of wandering, one could consider using terms like getting lost or losing one's way. And then we also have a list here of non-preferred terms when we're talking about behavior. So this includes terms like acting out or aggressive behavior, agitation, challenging behavior, difficult or problem behavior, hoarder or hoarding, violent, screamer, sundowning or sundowner, and wandering or wanderer. So again, these are more just kind of general labels and don't really give more detail into the context of when that behavior happens. So these non-preferred terms really are not specific, and they're suggesting that the behavior is a result of a problem with the person when really the behavior is in response to something. And again, it also labels the person as if that behavior happens all the time. But when we use more specific examples, we can really again provide that context and really come up with a more person-centered response when we're coming up with ways to respond to behavior. So hopefully some of those person-centered language terms are helpful in kind of reframing how we speak about dementia to others and with each other.
Thanks, Shelby. So the next step on our list is to be a friend. Dementia can really be kind of an isolating experience for people. Loneliness, among other complicated emotions, can affect one's mental well-being. And participating in meaningful social activities is really important for everyone. And people living with dementia don't want to lose their friends, and they don't want to stop doing those activities that they enjoy. Staying social through work or volunteer activities, maybe travel, maybe through hobbies, family and friends, it's really important for people living with dementia. And as an ally, it's essential to be supportive and to make that effort to keep up the friendship. Stay in touch. You can stay connected by talking on the phone, chatting online. You can send an email, or even writing a letter is a good way to stay connected if there's distance. As Keith, who's a person living with dementia, shares, people can live well with dementia if There's a spirit of understanding in all people around them and a collaborative approach in supporting the person living with dementia while focusing on what they can do and not what they can't do. So we want to support that person's capabilities. Social activity has been shown to help slow the progression of the disease, and being inclusive of people living with dementia really just helps to let them know that you care. Step 5 is to hear from people who have experienced stigma. So the Alzheimer's Society works to raise awareness of the realities of dementia and fight the effects of stigma. But there's perhaps no better way to know what the stigma is than to listen to the people that have experienced it firsthand. So as Shelby mentioned earlier, there is a website available through the Alzheimer's Society, and it's called ilivewithdementia.ca. And you can visit this website and read the stories of people living with dementia, their family members and their caregivers. And it helps to understand what it's like to live with dementia and face that stigma that exists. You can also start the conversation in your own community. So talk to people that you know who are living with dementia, or you can, if you have personal stories or personal experiences, sharing them openly is helpful. You can talk about the day-to-day experiences that you've had either living with dementia or caring for someone who lives with dementia. Step 6 is to test your attitude. So how do you perceive dementia? In 2017, the Alzheimer's Society surveyed over 1,500 Canadians about how they perceive that stigma associated with Alzheimer's disease and other forms of dementia. And early in our presentation, we've already touched on some of the results of that survey. But it's important that we highlight the 3 key takeaways from the survey results. The first is that the findings underscore the work that we still must do to end stigma once and for all. The second is that we can't let negative perceptions stand in the way of people living with dementia and caregivers seeking help and support. And the third is that life without discrimination is a right for anyone affected by this disease. You can visit the Alzheimer's Society's website to test your own attitude by taking this online quiz on misinformation and stereotypes about dementia. It offers 6 scenarios that involve dementia and kind of asks how you would handle each of these situations. It takes about 5 to 10 minutes to complete, and there's no right or wrong answers, but your response might surprise you.
Great, thanks, Chris. And I just put ilivewithdementia.ca and the link to that survey that Chris referred to in the chat, if anyone's looking for those to put into their web browser. So step 7 for ways to reduce dementia is to encourage an early diagnosis. So as we've been saying, people with dementia can live meaningful and productive lives for many years after an early diagnosis. Dementia diagnosed early helps both the person and family members to learn about the disease, set realistic expectations, and plan for their future. So over the next slides, we're going to go over some of the specific benefits of seeking an early diagnosis of dementia, because again, as we talked about earlier, there is a lot of stigma around, people kind of wanting to delay or avoid getting a diagnosis because of maybe the stigmas that they believe, but there are a lot of benefits to getting an early diagnosis. So this is by no means an exhaustive list, but let's take a moment to explore these 10 benefits of getting an early diagnosis. So getting an accurate diagnosis is really important. So it's important to know that some treatable conditions can produce symptoms that are similar to the symptoms of dementia. So for example, vitamin deficiencies, thyroid disease, sleep disorders, alcohol abuse or depression. Similarly, other possible causes of confusion could be poor sight or related to issues with hearing. And because of this, it's important to, see a medical professional and get that full medical assessment if you notice any changes in abilities or behaviors, because some symptoms of dementia can actually be related to treatable conditions. Having the ability to be actively involved in making personal decisions, including healthcare, is a benefit of getting an early diagnosis. So earlier in the disease process, individuals are able to participate more actively in their own healthcare decisions and future plans. And these rights are outlined in the Canadian Charter of Rights for people living with dementia. Being able to use treatments more effectively is also important. So treatment of Alzheimer's disease and other dementias is typically most effective when started early in the disease process. So this includes medications as well as other factors, such as maybe changing our lifestyle, including more exercise, changing our eating habits, being more social. The opportunity to focus on what's important is also, a great benefit of an early diagnosis. So an early diagnosis allows individuals to set priorities based on what's important to them. So it could be traveling, it could be pursuing new goals, or, trying to meet old goals. Or if someone's still working, it may be making that decision around work, how much longer they want to work for. And getting an earlier diagnosis also helps with the ability to make empowering choices. So an early diagnosis allows individuals to make informed decisions about legal, financial, and care matters, and to make their wishes known to family and friends as well. Early diagnosis allows time to take advantage of resources, so individuals and their families can benefit from local Alzheimer's Society information, support, and education programs that can help them learn how to live well with dementia. So we really hope when people get that early diagnosis that they get connected with our services as well. Family members will be better equipped to provide support as well. If family members can understand the disease better and the challenges and changes that might come with its progression, they're better able to provide support and access that help that's needed and have conversations with the person about some of those changes. And raising awareness. So, individuals can join other people living with dementia who are making their voices heard. They're raising awareness about the disease and the need for quality care and, the need for increased funding for research. So you'll see this when you go to the ilivewithdementia.ca. There's just so many people who have raised awareness by sharing their story on the website, and they're from all across Canada. An early diagnosis also helps with advancing research. So individuals who have an early diagnosis often have the opportunity to participate in various clinical trials and other research that can help, improve diagnosis and enhance care. And ultimately, an early diagnosis can also help to reduce stigma. So, individuals can continue to live their life to the fullest, to live well with dementia, share their personal experience of living with dementia as well. That can be really helpful in reducing the stigma around the disease and encouraging others to reach out for support as well. So again, as we talked about earlier, sometimes people, if they're noticing some signs of dementia, they're hesitant to, seek some help and to go see a doctor. But there are a lot of benefits into getting an early diagnosis. So hopefully that helps to outline what some of those are. And if you or someone you know is looking for more information regarding a diagnosis, you can visit our website and download a diagnosis toolkit to find tips on how to, talk to your doctor about dementia and to learn what to expect about getting a diagnosis as well. And we are also a phone call away as well. You do not need a diagnosis of dementia to reach out to the Alzheimer's Society. You're more than welcome to call and talk with our staff as well. And step 8 is to support the caregiver. So, as we talked about earlier when we were talking about stigma through association, caregivers need support too. So knowing more about what they go through is really a good start. Most caregivers wish that more people understood the realities of caring for someone living with dementia. So caregivers have shared that they often feel alone and isolated from friends. They may need help, but they may be reluctant to ask for that help. They're often unable to do, maybe simple things or what seems simple to us, like errands or complete, household tasks because of the demands that can come with the caregiving experience. Caregivers report experiencing stress that sometimes affects their own personal health as well. And they also really talk about the need for regular breaks from caregiving, and most importantly, the need for someone to listen as well. So how can you offer care and support, to the caregiver? So first, take time to listen. If the caregiver feels overwhelmed and needs to talk with someone, let them know that you're available to listen. Do little things. So little things can really mean a lot. So for example, if you're on your way out to do an errand and you know that the caregiver has a hard time getting out to the store, maybe give them a call and see if they need anything while you're out. See if you can give them, the caregiver, a break. So offer to visit the person living with dementia. And it doesn't have to be for that long, 30 minutes, an hour, and encourage the caregiver to use that time for themselves to enjoy maybe a favorite hobby, to run some errands, or to just spend some time alone. Provide a change of scenery. So maybe suggest an outing to the park or a visit to your own home. And, you can include the person living with dementia in that outing as well, but just having that change of scenery, can really, really be helpful. And as Chris mentioned earlier, keep in touch. So maintaining that contact is so important. People often talk about feeling that distance from between their friends now and things like that. So that contact could be as simple as a phone call, a card, an email, or a visit. So it can really, really mean a lot. And remember that dementia has an impact on all.
Yeah. Have to go back to my meeting.
Okay, sorry about that. Also remember that dementia has an impact on all family members as well. So, the spouses, adult children, and even young children as well. And be attentive to their needs. So often when we're running, a learning series, we'll often have, the children of someone living with dementia come with their parent, and they say, I'm worried about my parent who lives with dementia as well, but I'm also really worried about my dad or mom, whoever the caregiver is as well. So the kids often worry about both parents as well. And become informed, learn about dementia and how it affects the person and the family. So this was really loud and clear as I was going through the I Live with Dementia website and all of the personal stories. The people on the website, whether they're a person living with dementia or a caregiver, it was loud and clear that they really feel that people need to do more to understand dementia, to learn about it and talk about it. So that's really important as well. And stay the course. So it can be a long journey for caregivers. So any support that you can provide along the way will really be appreciated. So overall, if you know someone who is caring for a person living with dementia, it's important to show understanding and to offer help in whatever way works best for you. They certainly will appreciate that.
All right, we've made it to step 9. We're almost through our list today. For step 9, the focus here is just staying informed. So one way that you can stay informed is by following our Alzheimer's Society on social media, or following the Alzheimer's Society of Canada on social media like Facebook and Twitter and Instagram. That'll allow you to get some of the latest news about dementia. There seems to always be a flow of information and new developments. You can also hear stories of people who live well with dementia. Sharing these types of stories can increase awareness of dementia among the people within your social network. So if you happen to see an interesting story about dementia on social media and you hit that like button or that share button, then you've maybe shared it to somebody who otherwise wouldn't have seen it. We also encourage you to support our campaigns that raise awareness of the many issues that surround dementia in Canada. So some of those initiatives include the Canadian Charter of Rights for people living with dementia, our Dementia Friendly Canada initiative that I'm going to talk a little bit more about later on, and Canada's National Dementia Strategy. So all of these initiatives strive to reduce stigma against people living with dementia, their families, and their caregivers in Canada. And lastly, step 10, remember the person inside. Above all, it's important to remember that people living with dementia are still people, and dementia does not change that. What is always constant is that there's still lives to be lived, dreams to pursue, and people to love. If you have a friend or family member diagnosed with dementia, know that the feelings of loss and grief are normal and will likely grow more intense as the disease does progress. However, it is possible for the person to live well with dementia and maintain their quality of life for as long as possible. And you can help that person live well too. Thank you all so much for taking the time to join in this important conversation. And I would understand if you're now wondering what you can do with this information moving forward. Well, step 1, and I feel like we've said it and we'll say it again, is to keep on learning. So remember that misconceptions are often at the root of stigma. And through your participation in our presentation today, you've already begun to educate yourself. And we want to encourage you to keep going. So you can find out more about Alzheimer's disease and other forms of dementia. You can find out more about enhancing communication with people who live with dementia, or behavior changes you might see, or safety concerns for people living with dementia. And you can find out ways to make your community dementia friendly. Step 2 is to connect. So find out what's going on at your local Alzheimer's Society, including how your local society, so Alzheimer's Society of Peterborough, Kawartha Lakes, Northumberland, and Haliburton, we hope, find out what we're doing in the community and how you can get involved. And third, share what you've learned so you can spread the word about living well with dementia, either on your social media or in your community. There is a toolkit available to download for free on the I Live with Dementia website to help you do just that. And as we conclude our presentation today, I just wanted to share the words of Lynn, who's a caregiver from Quebec, and she shares her views on stigma and dementia, and this as well was taken from the ilivewithdementia.ca site. I believe that Alzheimer's disease and other forms of dementia are still a big mystery for the general public and a great source of discomfort. People think it's an old person's disease, which prevents us from having frank and open conversations sooner rather than later. Let's stop whispering the word Alzheimer's because we're afraid or ashamed of it. Let's avoid changing the radio station or the TV channel to escape talking about this important subject. By getting out of our comfort zone and talking about this disease loud and clear, we can move from words to action. Knowing and learning more about the disease allows us to suppress our fear, tame the unknown, and give ourselves the strength and means to face it with renewed hope. We need to act now because the needs of people living with dementia are huge. Equally important are the needs of family caregivers like me. Providing care to a family member with this disease has repercussions on our financial and personal health, as well as on our professional lives. I find that quote very profound. So just as we kind of wrap up here, as we mentioned earlier in our presentation, while Alzheimer's Awareness Month might stop at the end of January, the experiences of people who live with dementia do not stop. And as such, we need to continue to provide dementia education, raise awareness, and in turn fight stigma throughout the year. So here on your screen, you can see a list of the upcoming virtual education sessions that were listed on the education poster that you likely received. And one of the major themes regarding stigma is mentioned by people living with dementia and their caregivers on the ilivewithdementia.ca website is the need, importance, and power of education. Many of you have already attended or signed up for some of these sessions, and that is great, and we appreciate it. Thank you. We also encourage you to share and invite others to attend as well. As we've learned today, increasing understanding within our communities as a whole is so important for reducing stigma. If you're interested in a more interactive education session, please join us for Alicia's story. In honor of Alzheimer's Awareness Month, the Alzheimer's Society has launched a 4-part short film series that follows Alicia, a beautiful, vibrant mother and grandmother who lives with Alzheimer's disease, and her family as they confront this disease head on and share their story, struggle, and moments of connection. And during this session, we will share some video clips with you, and we're going to step inside the lives of Alicia and her daughter, who also happens to be her caregiver, named Judy, and the rest of their family, to get a look at how this disease affects everyone involved. And after each video, we'll take some time to have discussion together about what we have watched. I also wanted to take a moment to highlight our Dementia Friendly Communities initiative. A dementia-friendly community is a space where people living with dementia and their care partners are welcomed, included, and supported. It's a community that pays attention to both the social and physical needs of a person living with dementia. And the overarching goal of the DFC initiative is to work with businesses, organizations, community groups, and the general public to increase awareness of what dementia is and the challenges people who live with dementia might face while navigating their communities. B, provide strategies for interacting with people who live with dementia, including those who may have lost their way and might require some extra assistance. And C, discuss ways to make the physical environment within businesses or community spaces more accessible for those who live with dementia. So if you're interested in learning a little bit more about the Dementia Friendly Communities initiative, we'd invite you to attend our virtual education session on February 28th. And lastly, not on the screen here, but just something I wanted to mention that's coming up is a virtual session of our Care Essentials Learning Series. It's slated to start at the end of next month, so at the end of February. This series is for registered clients of the Alzheimer's Society and will be happening on Monday afternoons via Zoom. And if you are a care partner of someone who's living with dementia and you want to learn more about this opportunity, please give Shelby an email at shelby@alzheimerjourney.ca, or you can call her. Our number is 705-748-5131, and her extension is 126. You maybe put Shelby's contact info in the chat for anyone that might be interested in attending Care Essentials. So living with and supporting someone who has dementia isn't easy, and we want you to know that you are not alone and that the Alzheimer's Society is here to help. We have a range of supportive services designed to assist you in your journey. Please don't hesitate to reach out to us if you have any questions, if you want any additional information or resources, if you're interested in speaking with one of our client support coordinators about what you might be going through, please don't hesitate to give us a call. Okay, we're almost at the finish line here. We're going to take some questions. I just want to stop our recording and I'm going to stop sharing. Just one moment here.